Welcome back to State of the Nation. Tomorrow, the House of Lords will conclude the second reading debate on one of the most dangerous pieces of legislation to come before Parliament in years, the Assisted Suicide Bill. Supporters say it's compassionate, but the reality is that it's unsafe, unworkable and open to abuse. It is not a government bill. It wasn't in any party's manifesto. It doesn't benefit from the Salisbury-Addison Convention. It is a private member's bill, which means the Lords are under no obligation to pass it. Their job is to scrutinise and, if necessary, to block, and that's what I would encourage them to do. Many noble peers have spoken out against it already. The former Prime Minister, Baroness May, highlighted perfectly the reality of what this law means.
Finally, my lords, this is not an assisted dying bill. It is an assisted suicide bill.
And she's so right to say that, because the proponents of it think that the truth, assisted suicide, puts people off, so they try and use a euphemism. But why is this bill so dangerous? Well, first, it's wrong in principle. And second, the safeguards are illusory. The British Geriatric Society, Hospice UK, leading palliative care experts all warn that the system isn't equipped. 40% of hospices are planning cuts this year, and social care is heavily stretched. Yet we're being told this is the moment to introduce lethal drugs into the healthcare system. New Zealand legalised assisted suicide in 2021, and within the second year, cases rose 37% on the first year. Long-time Life campaigner Lord Alton, who will miss out on tomorrow's debate after being injured in a bus crash, has sent us this message highlighting the dangers of this legislation as seen in other countries which have passed it.
Where assisted suicide has been legalised, however tight the initial safeguards and however sincere the assurances that it would be a narrowly defined law for rare cases, the practice has tended to rapidly accelerate and expand. Sometimes this is by a clear expansion of the law, such as in the Netherlands and Belgium, where assisted deaths are now permitted even for children of all ages. But there's also a push in the Netherlands in allowing infant euthanasia for severely disabled babies. This isn't progressive, but regressive, a return to pre-civilization.
A return to pre-civilization. Well, just a fortnight ago, the bill's own sponsors were in Parliament with campaigners who want to expand the right to assist suicide to people who aren't terminally ill, even before the bill is passed. Once this principle is concluded, then this is the pattern that's followed in other countries. Assisted suicide is introduced for those with the worst illnesses, the hardest cases, the saddest cases. Then the law is relaxed so that even mentally ill children are at risk. As well as issues of morality, the bill itself is a bad piece of legislation. The Lords Delegated Powers Committee called it a skeleton bill, which means that the details are not in the bill itself, not the bill passed by Parliament, but get made up later by secondary legislation. This hands ministers powers to regulate all sorts of aspects of it, including the lethal substances, with minimal parliamentary scrutiny. It's lawmaking by blank cheque, literally on life and particularly death. We also need to look at how the government has handled this, because in a very unusual move, it recalled the House of Lords during the recess, which has the effect of stopping some people from turning up. Normally, Lords' sitting dates are set well in advance, but this has been brought forward, something that's normally only done in the event of war or economic collapse. It's quite an improper way to be fiddling around, playing ducks and drakes with the House of Lords for a bill that is not one with the government's imprimatur. It is not a government bill. So, what we have to realise is that this is not about compassion, it's about killing, it's about death. Real compassion means helping people to live, better hospice care, proper support, not telling vulnerable people that they're a burden on society, a cost to the NHS, and they'd be better off dead. The Lords should reject this bill, not out of coldness, but out of real care for those most at risk. Assisted suicide is not the solution, and I hope tomorrow they will stop Britain from going down this evil path. As ever, let me know what you think, mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm now joined by writer and broadcaster, Rabbi Jonathan Romain. Rabbi, thank you for joining me again. I'm always interested to talk to you. Tomorrow is a really key day, and the House of Lords so far, the speeches have been more against than in favour. Do you get the feeling the House of Lords may vote the bill down?
Not at all, and I do have to correct a couple of things if you don't mind. Firstly, it's not called the assisted suicide bill. It is actually.
I know that, but that's just bogus, and we've discussed
Can you
that.
listen?
It's
Can you
frightful
listen?
humbug. Yeah, I will, but I've already said that was humbug, so I'm happy to say it again. Humbug.
But you'll have to, because it's very important for your listeners to realise it is only for people who are terminally ill. In other words, they are already dying, and what's more, they are dying in pain. And this bill is about saying to those people, if you are dying in pain and you would like to let go and say, thank you, God, it's been a great life, but I really don't want to carry on in agony, then they should have that right. And by the way, it's not a blank cheque. It's actually the democratic process, because the Parliament, the Commons, voted for it. And unless you want to undo the...
Okay, let's deal with those 2 points, because the first one...
I haven't finished, actually. I haven't finished, actually.
Well, you've mentioned 2 points. Let's just discuss this, and then you can come back, because I really want to hear what you've got to say. But on the first point, on the question of assisted suicide, even if you are terminally ill, we're all going to die eventually, and you kill yourself, that is suicide. So it is assisted suicide. On the second point of blank cheque, I was talking... hold on, let me make those points, and then you can come back. On the point of blank cheque, I was making the point about how the legislation was written. And I know about how legislation is written, and people do bring forward skeleton bills, but they're a very bad form of legislation because they don't have proper scrutiny on the details. So you can answer those 2 points, if you will.
As a former MP, you don't trust the MPs and the will of Parliament. Is that what you're saying? I find that hard to believe. And by the way, if you believe in Brexit...
No, you're making an entirely different point, if I may, that there are bills that are well constructed and there are bills that are badly constructed. Now, well-constructed bills have the details within them, within the Act of Parliament. Badly constructed skeleton bills leave a lot to discretion afterwards. So that's the point about the blank cheque. It's not to do with whether the House of Commons passed it or not. That's a different question.
Which is exactly why there's an interim period of 4 years to make sure all those details are sorted out. And you need to emphasise how lucky we are, because we're not leaping into the dark. We're taking advantage of so many other countries and their different models. And you're quite right. There are some countries which wouldn't do the things that we're going to do. We're going to follow the Oregon model, which has always been terminally ill and has never had any slippage from that. This is a British bill for British values. And I would have thought that you would appreciate that we can do something that is for this country. And by the way, the doctors agree with me, because that's why the British Medical Association has gone from opposition to neutral, and not just them, the Royal Colleges.
Well, with respect, neutral doesn't mean they agree with you. If we can use language accurately, it means neutral.
It means people. It means they don't regard it as a heinous, vile bill. They regard it as something that every person has a right to decide. So that you and I, God forbid that we should end up in pain, we have the option of saying, yes, we're going to carry on to our last breath, or we can say, I just want to let go gently. Why aren't you giving people options? Why are you insisting? I mean, you can choose what you like for you and your family when your end comes, but why are you insisting that other people have to die in pain because of your principles? That doesn't seem to me either fair, arrogant, or even religious.
Well, first of all, because I think that it is important that people should be helped to live rather than be killed by the state. But you mentioned Oregon. When it started, there were 367 deaths. Now there are 2,847. There's been a massive increase of deaths in Oregon. And that is really, this becomes a rolling system. More and more people get killed, and they get killed because it's convenient for the state to get rid of the halt and the lame who are a cost to society.
But you need to add that's been over 27 years. In other words, a very new system has now become well known. And you also need to tell your listeners that the total number today is still 0.8% of all deaths in Oregon. In other words, it's still very, very minimal. And we're talking about
nearly 1% of deaths. Nearly 1% of deaths. Yeah, that's nearly 1%. That's a lot of deaths of people who are now being killed, sentenced to death effectively in Oregon. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me.